No one expected controversy that morning. Not the producers carefully checking their rundowns. Not the studio audience settling into their seats with coffee in hand. Not even the woman holding the microphone, confident she was about to deliver just another routine daytime segment. The lights were bright. The atmosphere was calm. Everything about the studio said safe conversation. It was supposed to be a standard daytime interview. Polite questions, respectful answers, a quiet reflection on legacy. The kind of segment people half-watch while getting ready for work or eating breakfast. Then something shifted. A journalist leaned forward, glanced briefly at her notes, and looked straight into the camera. Her tone sharpened, just slightly. Enough for people to notice, but not enough to stop her. And then she said it. She called Muhammad Ali a coward. The word landed hard, not shouted, not dramatic, just spoken, clearly, calmly, and live on television. For a split second, the studio froze. You could feel it through the screen, the way a room does when everyone realizes something irreversible has just been said. A few audience members shifted in their seats. Someone inhaled sharply. Even the cameraman hesitated, unsure whether to cut away. This wasn't a heated debate show. This wasn't late night television. This was daytime television, where words are usually softened, filtered, and safe. And yet, there it was, out in the open. Impossible to take back. What no one knew in that moment, neither the journalist nor the viewers at home, was that the next few minutes would completely flip the power in the room. Because before the segment was over, before the cameras stopped rolling, those same cameras would capture something no one planned for. The journalist, composed professional, in control, would be seen fighting back tears. Have you ever watched someone cross a line in public and realized instantly that they couldn't undo what they'd just said? The studio was bright and relaxed. The kind of place designed to make people feel comfortable the moment they walked in. Soft, even lighting filled the room, washing away harsh shadows. A large screen glowed behind the set, and warm colors framed the stage. On the desk in front of the chairs sat neatly placed coffee mugs, props meant to signal ease, familiarity, and calm conversation. This wasn't a confrontational space. It was daytime television. The audience was small, but friendly. Some nodded along before the interview even began, already settled into the rhythm of a morning talk show. This was the kind of program people watched while folding laundry, eating breakfast, or half listening as the day slowly started. Seated calmly in his chair was Muhammad Ali. He was older now. His movements slower, his voice softer than the man the world once knew. But even in stillness, he carried presence. There was something unmistakable about him, the posture, the eyes, the quiet confidence of someone who had already lived through storms most people only read about. He wasn't there to perform. He wasn't there to provoke. He was there to reflect. Across from him, the journalist smiled politely, glancing down at her notes and then back up again. Her tone was warm, professional, controlled. This was her space, her studio, her questions, her timing. The conversation so far had been exactly what everyone expected. Questions about legacy, about fame, about how it felt to be remembered. Ali answered calmly, sometimes with brief smiles, sometimes with thoughtful pauses. There was no tension, no edge, just a sense of routine. A carefully balanced exchange that felt almost rehearsed in its safety. Everything about the moment suggested predictability. This was the kind of interview where nothing unexpected happens, where words are chosen carefully and difficult topics are softened by polite language and gentle transitions. A setting where controversy feels out of place. And that's exactly why it mattered. Because moments like this create an illusion of protection. People assume that the lights, the smiles, and the format itself will act as a shield. That certain words won't feel as sharp in a friendly space. That boundaries somehow blur when the environment feels calm. But calm settings don't weaken words. They amplify them. When something harsh is said in a loud, hostile place, it blends into the noise. When it's said in a quiet, respectful room, it echoes. That's why the most damaging moments rarely come from chaos. They come from comfort, from people believing that the setting will soften the impact of what they're about to say. And in that bright, relaxed studio, where everything felt safe, respectful, and controlled, no one yet realized how quickly that sense of security was about to disappear. The tone changed. It wasn't sudden. It didn't arrive with raised voices or dramatic music. It slipped in quietly, almost politely. The journalist leaned forward slightly, her posture shifting just enough for the audience to notice. She glanced down at her notes, then back up at Muhammad Ali, and introduced a subject everyone in the room knew carried weight. She asked about his refusal to fight in the Vietnam War. At first, the question sounded neutral, historical, even reasonable. Ali had been asked about it countless times before. The audience remained calm, waiting for a familiar answer. But then her voice changed, just a little. Some people still believe, she said carefully, choosing each word, that refusing to fight made you a coward. The studio reacted instantly, though no one spoke. A few audience members shifted in their seats. Summoning cleared their throat. A quiet ripple of discomfort moved through the room. The word coward didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a judgment. The journalist paused, letting the moment breathe. And then she did something that made it worse. She turned her gaze away from Ali and looked straight into the camera, the one pointed at millions of viewers at home. Were they right? The word hung in the air, not shouted, not softened, just placed there, deliberately, for a brief moment. Time felt suspended. The casual atmosphere that had filled the studio, only minutes earlier, vanished. The bright lights suddenly felt harsh. The smiles from earlier felt distant, inappropriate. This wasn't just a question anymore. It was a public challenge. Ali didn't respond right away. He didn't interrupt. He didn't lean forward. He didn't show anger on his face. He simply sat there, silent. That silence was heavier than any argument could have been. It stretched just long enough for everyone to feel it, for the audience to realize they were witnessing a turning point, for the journalist to sense that something irreversible had already happened in live television. Silence is dangerous. It exposes intent. It forces people to sit with what's been said. And now, everyone had to sit with that word, coward. A word aimed at a man who had sacrificed his championship titles, his income, and years of his career. A word spoken not in a heated debate, but in a calm daytime studio, where its impact felt sharper, colder, and impossible to ignore. No producer cut in. No host redirected the conversation. The cameras kept rolling, because this was live, and in that stillness, the entire mood of the room had changed. Not because of a raised fist or an insult shouted in anger, but because of a single word spoken calmly, on purpose, in front of the world. Have you ever heard just one word, said at the wrong moment, completely change the atmosphere of a room? Ali took a slow breath, not a dramatic one, not the kind meant to signal outrage or prepare for an argument, just a quiet breath, in and out. He'd been called worse before. Much worse. He'd been labeled unpatriotic, dangerous, traitorous. He'd stood in courtrooms where prison sentences were discussed as casually as weather. He'd watched his championship titles stripped away, his income vanish, and the best years of his boxing career slip past him, while others took his place in the ring. He knew what hostility felt like. He knew what public judgment sounded like. And, right now, sitting under studio lights, he knew exactly what power he held. He could snap back instantly. One sharp sentence, clever, biting, unforgettable, could have embarrassed the journalist on her own show. The audience would have reacted. Headlines would have written themselves. He was Muhammad Ali, after all, a master of words as much as fists. He had ended debates with rhyme. He had dismantled critics with humor. He could have done it again. But he didn't. Instead, he studied her face, not with anger, not with contempt, with patience. In that brief pause, something important happened. Something most people never notice when watching moments like this. Ali wasn't deciding what to say. He was deciding who he wanted to be in that moment. He understood that this wasn't really about winning an exchange. It was about what millions of people would learn from it. He saw the tension in the journalist's posture. The confidence she'd carried minutes earlier had tightened, as if she suddenly realized she'd stepped into deeper water than expected. He saw a person who had asked a powerful question, but hadn't fully considered the weight of it. Ali could feel the room leaning forward, waiting. Silence on live television is loud. It demands a response. But Ali didn't rush to fill it, because true strength doesn't panic when challenged. It doesn't scramble to prove itself. It pauses. In that pause was everything he'd learned. not just from boxing, but from loss, faith, and consequence. He knew that anger would be easy, control would be harder. And control was the point. When he finally lifted his eyes, his expression wasn't defensive. It was calm, grounded. Human. He wasn't looking at a journalist who had insulted him. He was looking at a person who was about to hear something real. That's when he spoke, not loudly, not theatrically, just clearly. And in doing so, he reframed the moment, not as a confrontation, but as a lesson. Because Ali understood something most people don't in moments of public disrespect. Reacting quickly might feel satisfying, but responding thoughtfully is what lasts. The room didn't know it yet, but the power had already shifted. Not because Ali had said anything clever, not because he had defended his pride, but because he chose restraint in a moment that invited retaliation. True confidence doesn't rush to defend itself. It waits, then chooses the response that reveals character, not ego. Ali's voice was soft, not weak, not uncertain. Soft in the way that forces people to lean in and listen. "I didn't refuse to fight because I was afraid," he said calmly. "I refused because my conscience wouldn't let me." The words landed gently, but they carried weight. The studio felt completely silent. No murmurs from the audience. No shuffling of papers. Even the quiet hum of the set lights seemed louder than before. Ali continued, his tone steady, measured, unhurried. "I was willing to lose my title, my money, my freedom." Each pause felt intentional, as if he wanted every word to be fully heard before moving to the next. "But I wasn't willing to lose myself." The journalist's polite smile faded almost imperceptibly. Her posture stiffened. This wasn't the answer she had prepared for. This wasn't a defensive explanation or an emotional outburst she could redirect. This was conviction. Ali wasn't arguing. He wasn't pleading his case. He was stating facts from a life already lived. Across the studio, audience members sat motionless. Some stared at Ali. Others glanced toward the journalist, sensing the shift in balance. The conversation had quietly moved beyond journalism into something far more personal. Ali went on, still calm, still controlled. "Fear runs from sacrifice," he said. "Cowards don't give up everything for what they believe is right." There was no accusation in his voice, no edge, just clarity. The sentence hung in the air, unanswered. It didn't demand agreement. It didn't seek applause. It simply existed, firm and unshakable. The journalist blinked slowly. This was the moment when interviews usually pivot, when a host jumps in, reframes the discussion, or softens the tone to regain control. But no one interrupted. No producer cut to a break, because nothing needed to be added. Ali had done something rare in public confrontation. He had removed emotion from the equation without removing. Meaning, he hadn't attacked the journalist. Personally, he hadn't even directly defended himself. Instead, he reframed the entire premise. If cowardice means avoiding loss, then what do you call a man who accepted loss willingly? If fear defines weakness, then how do you label someone who stood firm knowing the consequences? These questions weren't spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. They were already echoing in the room. The journalist's eyes dropped briefly to her notes, now useless. The structure she'd prepared, the follow-up questions, the transitions, no longer fit the moment. Her role as the one in control had quietly slipped away. Ali remained still. He wasn't waiting for validation. He wasn't seeking approval. He had said what he needed to say. There was no applause, no swelling music, no dramatic reaction shot, just silence. And in that silence was truth, uncomfortable, undeniable, and impossible to spin. Moments like this are heavy not because of volume, but because of certainty. Ali wasn't trying to win an argument. He was explaining a choice that had already cost him everything, and that he would make again without hesitation. That's why the room didn't know how to respond. Because when someone speaks from lived consequence instead of opinion, there's nothing left to challenge. If you were sitting across from him, faced with that level of calm conviction, would you have known how to respond? The journalist tried to speak, then stopped. Her mouth opened slightly, as if a response was already forming. But no sound came out. For a brief second, she looked unsure of what to do next, caught between professional instinct and something far more human. Her eyes dropped to the notes in front of her. The same notes she had relied on all morning. The same notes that, just minutes earlier, had given her confidence. Now, they felt useless. Her fingers tightened around the papers, and that's when it became noticeable. Her hands were trembling. Not dramatically. Not enough to draw immediate attention. Just enough to betray what was happening beneath the surface. For the first time since the interview began, the power in the room had shifted. Not because someone raised their voice, not because someone dominated the conversation, but because someone spoke with integrity and left no space for posturing. Across from her, sat Muhammad Ali, calm and composed. He wasn't staring her down. He wasn't waiting for an apology. He wasn't even watching her closely. He had already finished. That, somehow, made it harder. In live television, hosts are trained to recover, to redirect, to keep momentum moving forward no matter what happens. Silence is the enemy. Hesitation is weakness. But this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. The camera lingered on the journalist longer than planned. In control rooms, producers usually cut away quickly from moments like this, tighten the frame, switch angles, protect the flow of the show. But no one did. Maybe they didn't know how. Maybe they sensed that interrupting would break something important. The audience remained still. No whispers, no reactions. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was a reckoning. The journalist swallowed hard. Her shoulders dropped slightly, as if the weight of the moment had finally reached her. The confidence she'd carried earlier, the practiced tone, the subtle authority, had dissolved. And then it happened. Her eyes filled with tears. Not sudden. Not theatrical. Slowly, the kind of tears that arrive when someone realizes they've misjudged a moment, and there's no way to rewind it. She looked away from Ali, away from the camera, away from the audience. In that instant, the entire narrative flipped. Just minutes earlier, she had framed the conversation. She had introduced the word that cut through the room. She had held the microphone, the questions, the power of live broadcast. Now she was exposed, not as a villain, but as a person confronted with the weight of her own words. Ali didn't move. He didn't lean forward to press his point. He didn't offer a follow-up explanation. He didn't take advantage of the moment. He allowed it to exist. That restraint spoke louder than anything else. Because the realization wasn't forced. It wasn't cornered. It arrived on its own. This wasn't about winning or losing an exchange. It was about understanding, too late, that some questions carry consequences beyond ratings or sound bites. The audience could feel the humanity of it. This wasn't humiliation. It was awareness. The kind that hits quietly when defenses fall and pride has nowhere to hide. The journalist wiped at her eyes, trying to regain composure. She nodded slightly, as if acknowledging something internally rather than to anyone else in the room. The show moved forward eventually. It had to, but the moment had already passed the point of control, because what viewers witnessed wasn't a breakdown. It was a shift. A moment where integrity outweighed authority, where calm dismantled confidence, where words spoken with conviction met their full emotional cost. And once that happens, on live television, in front of the world, there's no editing it out. The truth had already landed. During the break, the cameras kept rolling. Not intentionally at first. No dramatic plan. Just a few extra seconds of footage that no one thought would matter. But sometimes the moments that linger the longest are the ones that weren't meant to be seen. The journalist reached for a tissue and wiped her face, her movements careful, almost mechanical. The composure she had relied on throughout her career was gone, replaced by something quieter and more fragile. She stared down at the desk, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. The studio felt different now. The lights were the same, the set hadn't changed, but the atmosphere had. Across from her sat Muhammad Ali. He leaned toward her slightly, not toward the camera, not toward the audience, but toward her. What he said wasn't part of the show. There was no microphone adjustment, no performance in his voice, just a low human tone. "I don't blame you," he said gently, but words matter when millions are listening. There was no accusation in it. No victory, no trace of bitterness, just truth. The journalist nodded. She didn't look up. She didn't try to respond. For a moment, she simply closed her eyes, as if absorbing the weight of what had just happened. Not just the interview, but the responsibility that came with her role. She was unable to speak. That, more than anything else, defined the moment. Because Ali hadn't won by overpowering her, he hadn't silenced her with dominance. He had met her challenge with clarity, and left her with reflection instead of shame. When the broadcast resumed, the tone was noticeably softer. The segment ended politely, professionally, but something had shifted beneath the surface. The audience applauded lightly, not out of excitement, but out of respect. By afternoon, the clip was everywhere. It spread across television replays, online platforms, and quiet conversations between people who had watched it live. But it wasn't shared because Ali had been insulted. It was shared because of how he responded. Viewers didn't replay the moment for drama. They replayed it for meaning. People commented not on the journalist's question, but on Ali's restraint, on his willingness to explain rather than attack, on the way he stood by a decision that had cost him years of his life, without anger, without regret. In a media world fueled by outrage and reaction, this moment stood out precisely because it refused both. It reminded people of something easy to forget. Courage isn't shouting back. It isn't dominating a conversation. It isn't humiliating someone who made a mistake. Courage is standing calmly in your truth, especially when it would be easier to lash out. Ali didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand an apology. He didn't reclaim power by taking it from someone else. He simply let his life speak for itself. That's why the moment stayed with people. Because everyone has been misunderstood at some point. Everyone has faced a moment when their choices were reduced to a single word by someone who didn't carry the consequences. And very few people respond the way Ali did. The journalist went on with her career. The show continued. The world moved forward. But that exchange remained. A quiet example of how integrity looks under pressure. Not perfect, not polished. Just honest courage isn't shouting back. It's standing calmly in your truth while others crumble under it. If you believe real bravery is standing by your conscience, even when it costs you everything, type courage in the comments. And tell me, do you think you would have handled that moment the same way?